Myself and most of my fellow content creators are at the age where we grew up and the proverbial console wars were against Nintendo and Sega. Many of us here in the Stadia community look fondly at those days, and some of us may call that the pinnacle of gaming. When it was just Super Mario vs. Sonic the Hedgehog, everything in the world seemed right. Fast forward to today, and while Sega is no longer in the hardware business, they do produce third-party games for consoles and PC. Last week, in fact, StadiaSource.com reported new job listings from a company known as Hardlight, which happens to be a subsidiary development company for Sega. They're most known for their development on mobile games featuring Sega IP, their most successful being Sonic Dash, which has seen over 350 million downloads. So why does StadiaSource.com report on this, and why are we talking about this today? Well, guess what? Some of those job listings that we were just talking about include porting over to consoles, which, well, guess what? One of those consoles they included was Google Stadia. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring a couple friends here with me to talk about this, is we're going to talk about Sega IPs and ports and remasters, or whatever the case may be, that we would love to see on Google Stadia in 2020 and beyond. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to get subscribed and turn that bell notification on so you stay up to date with new videos when they go live and when we do new live streams, because this Friday at 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time, episode number 4 of the Stadia Initiative podcast will be going live here on the channel. And before that, I'll be over on ROKK'S channel doing Rockstars at Night at about 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time, and you can find the link to that in the description below. In my very first Stadia video, I discussed my love for the Sega Genesis, as just like many of you, it was my very first console growing up. Now, I had about 3 or 4 years of indoctrination from the Blue Hedgehog before I even heard of Nintendo or Super Mario, but you know, I was all about the blue blur growing up, and to this day, I will still pledge allegiance to Sega. And it's a shame because back in 2001, Sega announced that they were getting out of the hardware game, thanks to the unfortunate failure of, before the Dreamcast, the Saturn as well. So the Dreamcast only had about 2 years of life before Sega pulled the plug on that and moved to becoming a third-party publisher. And because of this, we haven't seen much from their IPs since the days of the Dreamcast, just for whatever reason. And it's not that these IPs were bad by any means, they just haven't really had the chance to shine, or the renewed focus from Sega themselves to say, you know what, we're really going to push our guys out there and make sure that you've heard of all of these IPs. And they, in my opinion, they just haven't done the greatest job of protecting their properties. Outside of Sonic, and even Sonic, their main character, their mascot, if you will, he's suffered a lot over the last 15 years. So here's what we're going to do in this specific video. Now, as we mentioned, Sega is looking at porting new games over to different consoles, including, I would imagine, the Xbox One and possibly Series X, the Switch, PlayStation 4, and PlayStation 5. I don't think the job listing specifically says the next-gen consoles just yet, but Google Stadia and PC are also included in this list. Now, what I'm going to do in this video, and a couple of my friends are going to do in this video, are they're going to talk about games we saw from yesteryear that we love on Stadia to come to the platform, and the ways of ports or maybe remasters. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to talk about games I would love to see a sequel happen for. Now, here's what we want you to do. We want you to list in the comments below what Sega games you would love to see show up on Google Stadia, whether it's a port, a remaster, or just a brand new game from a series that you used to love as a kid or even nowadays. Now, to start off the list, I'm going to go off with the most obvious, because this is something we haven't seen in quite some time, and that is Sonic the Hedgehog 3, which is just a game that's been marred by some interesting backstory. But before we get there, Sonic 3 was a big deal to a lot of people growing up because, in my opinion, it is the quintessential way to play a Sonic game, at least on the 2D plane. You have all the new mechanics, including like hypersonic. You have all these different stages that you get just from the combination of playing with Sonic and Knuckles, and that's just an entirely different subject. But I mean, the lock-on technology that Sonic and Knuckles brought was very groundbreaking for its time. Of course, as I mentioned, the vast amount of levels, the boss battles, the special stages, and the inclusion of one of the biggest fan favorites in all of Sonic, and maybe gaming even. Knuckles the Echidna was introduced in Sonic 3, and Sonic and Knuckles technically, but okay. Here we go. So Sonic 3 and Knuckles, one of my favorite games, if not my favorite game of all time, but it doesn't appear in many collections nowadays. So whether it's a Sega Genesis collection or the Sega Genesis Mini, you're probably wondering, well, where is Sonic 3? Where is Sonic and Knuckles? Well, the interesting backstory here is, and this has been corroborated by a couple of people, but it hasn't been ever officially confirmed as far as I'm aware, is Michael Jackson.
Yes, that Michael Jackson. MJ was a fan of Sonic and already linked to Sega thanks to his Moonwalker game already having released on the platform. So he was believed, and this story has been corroborated amongst plenty of sources, to have worked on music for Sonic 3. While this next aspect hasn't been fully corroborated, it is believed that Michael Jackson's involvement in the musical composition of certain stages in Sonic 3 has led to licensing issues preventing Sonic 3, and by extension its other half Sonic and Knuckles, from seeing itself on new Genesis Collection releases, including last year's very popular Genesis Mini. So it would be a complete dream of mine and many other Sonic fans not to just see a Stadia version happen, but to see it on new console experiences alike. Now, I'm not the only diehard Sonic fan in the Stadia community, and if you follow most of us around here, it's no surprise that Dan of StadiaSource.com is a huge Sonic fan, so much so that he even created his own version of Super Smash Bros. Containing nothing but Sonic characters. But now we're getting a little slightly off topic. I reached out to Dan to see what Sonic games he would love to see come to Stadia, and here's what he had to say. Well, being a massive Sonic the Hedgehog fan, I'd have to start off by saying every Sonic game ever. Heck, even Sonic 06. Just get Sonic on Stadia. But I realize it's too broad of a choice, so I'll narrow it down as best as I can. Sonic Mania needs to be on Stadia. It's a glorious return to the classic style of Sonic gameplay that we children of the 90s grew up with. Sonic Adventure I feel would do well too, but I feel to do a remaster or remake, either that or the fabled Sonic Adventure 3, which people have been wishing for years now, and lastly, Sonic Generations. Again, a nod to both classic and modern Sonic games. Moving away from Sonic though, I'd love to see a remake of Jet Set Radio. I know that game has a loyal fan base. And there we have a good jumping off point, because Jet Set Radio was an incredibly unique game that originally came out for the Sega Dreamcast that, for lack of a better way of putting it, simply fit in with the times it existed in. Extreme sports and counterculture was all the rage back in the 90s and early 2000s, and Jet Set Radio fit that bill perfectly to a T. It was unique enough to set it apart from other games you would consider to be in the same genre, like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX, yet the formula just worked. Me personally, I don't think a AAA price could follow something like Jet Set Radio if it were to see a reboot or even a remaster. Take a look at Tony Hawk 1 and 2 coming out in September, which are two of the greatest sports games of the 20th century, and those are getting fully remastered and coming out at just $40. But Jet Set Radio was never designed to be that type of game. It's a downright a fun game that can be enjoyed by a lot of people, and if you put it at the $15 price or so in the Stadia store, I know you'd find quite a few takers to jump on their skates again. Next up, I want to welcome another good friend of the channel, Ray3473, and what Sega titles he would love to see find its way to Stadia.
Well, hello, Brian, and thanks for having me here. Hello, everybody. This is 3473. I am the gaming cyborg. Man, I am so excited. Sega porting over to Stadia. Man, I'm going to tell you my two favorite games that I played when I was young. I played Ultra Beast, which was an awesome platform. I played all night long. And then one of my favorite fighting games, wasn't that popular, but I loved it, Eternal Champions.
Beat 'em ups and fighting games were extremely popular in the arcades, and thanks to consoles like the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, they would find their way in your home as well. Ultra Beast made its name in the arcades and is considered a staple in every Sega Genesis best of list, thanks to its unique story elements and gameplay mechanics. While Eternal Champions was an homage to fighting games present in arcades that found its way to home consoles first. Eternal Champions alongside Ultra Beast would make for some very interesting additions to the Stadia library. But now it's time to get a little bit more interesting. I have only one more port on here before I rattle off brand new games for Sega to bring over, because this one absolutely needs to happen. The Sega Saturn is a unique discussion point when talking about video game history. Plenty of great games came from the Saturn, but it's usually looked back at in a negative light due to its poor market reception here in the States, its lack of third-party support, hardware limitations, and the fact that there was not a single new Sonic title on the Sega Saturn. But as I mentioned, there were quite a few gems from the Saturn, and due to its limited stock at the time, and thanks to Father Time itself, a lot of these games have reached outrageous prices on the secondhand market. Even something as simple as Mortal Kombat 2, which isn't the hardest game to get a hold of nowadays elsewhere, finds itself sitting in the $40 to $60 mark on the Sega Saturn due to its limited availability. And Mortal Kombat 2 is arguably one of the worst developed ports on the Saturn, but again, we're getting slightly off topic. Panzer Dragoon Remastered is set for release on Google Stadia at some point this year, and Panzer Dragoon 2 was announced at the onset of the first game's trailer, but we haven't heard about platform availability nor when that will appear. There is one game missing, and that is Panzer Dragoon Saga. Saga is considered by many not only the pinnacle of Sega Saturn gaming, but gaming in the 90s, as it's looked back as an incredible game. Due to its pricing, which at best case scenario sits around the $650 mark in the second-hand market, it's been unplayable for a large majority of gamers, including myself. I would love if Google funded a project to either remake or remaster Saga, as it is rumored to have most of its master files lost over time, so a simple port isn't necessarily possible. If you're familiar with the original Panzer Dragoon either from the Saturn, its inclusion in Orta from the Xbox, or the remaster on the Switch, but not the third game, they don't necessarily play the same. Saga takes elements from the first game, but is by and large an expansive role-playing game. Packed with what some consider to be more than an amazing story, Panzer Dragoon Saga only showed itself off to just a few gamers here in North America, and to this day maintains too high of a price point for a game many people may not have even heard of to consider playing. Google could absolutely turn heads with Saga in its future library, and even more so if they secured exclusivity to it. Lastly, we can only truly speculate for this in terms of what the games would entail, but these are Sega IPs I would love to see be brought back into the modern era with a new title. Piggybacking off of Panzer Dragoon Saga is Skies of Arcadia. Skies of Arcadia, like Panzer Dragoon Saga, has somewhat of a high price tag compared to its original release point, but maintains far more attainable status, under $100 for the Dreamcast version and just north of $100 for the GameCube remaster. Skies of Arcadia was another role-playing game received extremely well and largely has been an IP that Sega has barely touched. In a US Gamer article just this year, Kenji Haruto, one of the main developers of Skies of Arcadia, tweeted a response when he was questioned about his interest in the future of Skies of Arcadia, and he wrote, "I really want to develop the sequel." Coupled with Sega's own desire and Mr. Haruto's hope for bringing back old and new IP, I'd say Skies of Arcadia has a good chance of seeing a future sequel. Though I feel a retooled remaster of the GameCube port is more likely to gauge that interest. While Sonic wasn't present outside of collections and ports on the Sega Saturn, someone else from Sonic Team had to hold down the fort. A brand new game came out for the Sega Saturn called Nights into Dreams, and when we talk about unique concepts, the gameplay mechanics found in Nights has to rank among the top of those. While Nights into Dreams has seen a modern day sequel on the Nintendo Wii, which we don't talk about that, Nights can find an audience in today's world with its unique puzzling and racing to the finish. Add handheld mode to a game like this, and for me, it's a dream on Stadia. And while this video could be a couple hours long, I'm going to stop right there and ask, what do you guys want to see from Sega on Stadia? Do you want to see remasters and ports of games from yesteryear, or do you clamor for a sequel in a beloved series? Let me know your thoughts down below. Again, I want to thank Dan from Stadia Source and Ray3473 for contributing their suggestions for this video. You can find them on YouTube and the links in the description, as well as their Twitter pages. I also want to thank not only Ray, but other members of this channel, in which you can see on screen right here. They are Club Stadia VIP members, and they get access to channel exclusive emotes during live streams, as well as early access to new videos I do, and those will be available in the member only Discord, and you can find a link to the Discord in the description below. Don't forget to @ me on Twitter @ Club Stadia TV for my latest thoughts around the world of video gaming and elsewhere, and also like this video if it helps you out, and get subscribed for the latest updates and analysis on Google Stadia. We'll be back on Friday this week with episode 4 of the Stadia Initiative at 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time. I'll be over on ROKK'S channel before TSI for Rockstars at Night, so join us over there for some fun as well. And lastly, and always, I want to thank you, and party on.